Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jai Udiraye. We're reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 10. Bhagavatam is the answer to all questions. And today's verse is number 9. I'll do the word for word first. Ekam. One. Ekatara. Another. Bhave. In the absence of. Yada. Because. Na. Does not. Upalabhame. No. Upalabhamahe. Upalabhamahe. Perceptible. Tritayam. In 3 stages. Tatra. There. Ya. The one. Veda. Who knows. Sa. He. Atma. The supersoul. Swa. Own. Ashraya. Shelter. Ashraya. Of the shelter. All 3 of the above mentioned stages of different living entities are interdependent. In the absence of one, another is not understood. But the Supreme Being who sees every one of them as the shelter of the shelter is independent of all. And therefore, he is the supreme shelter. Ekam ekatara bhave. Yada nopa balamahe. Tritayam tatra yo veda. Sa-atma swa-shraya-shraya. Ekam ekatara bhave. Yada nupapalamahe. Tritayam tatra yo veda. Sa-atma swa-shraya-shraya. Ekam ekatara bhave. Yada nopapalamahe. Yada nopalabhamahe. Tritayam tatra yo veda. Sa-atma swa-shraya-shraya. Ekam ekatara bhave. Yada nopalabhamahe. Tritayam tatra yo veda. Sa-atma swa-shraya-shraya. All 3 of the above mentioned stages of different living entities are interdependent. In the absence of one, another is not understood. But the Supreme Being who sees every one of them as the shelter of the shelter is independent of all. And therefore, he is the supreme shelter. Purport. There are innumerable living entities, one dependent on the other in the relationship of the controlled and the controller. But without the medium of perception, no one can know or understand who is the controlled and who is the controller. For example, the sun controls the power of our vision. We can see the sun because the sun has its body, and the sunlight is useful only because we have eyes. Without our having eyes, the sunlight is useless. And without sunlight, the eyes are useless. Thus, they're interdependent, and none of them is independent. Therefore, the natural question arises concerning who made them independent. The one who has made such a relationship of interdependence must be ultimately completely independent. As stated in the beginning of the Srimad Bhagavatam, the ultimate source of all interdependent objectives is the complete independent subject. This ultimate source of all interdependence is the Supreme Truth, or the Paramatma, the Super Soul, who is not dependent on anything else. He is swa-kathāḥ. He is only dependent on his self, and thus he is the supreme shelter of everything. Although Paramatma and Brahman are subordinate to Bhagavan, because Bhagavan is Purushottama, or the Supreme Person, he is the source of the Super Soul also. In the Bhagavad Gītā 15:18, Lord Krishna says that he is the Purushottama and the source of everything. And thus, it is concluded that Sri Krishna is the ultimate source and shelter of all entities, including the Super Soul and Supreme Brahman. Even accepting that there is no difference between the Super Soul and the individual soul is dependent on the Super Soul for being liberated from the illusion of material energy. The individual is under the clutches of illusory energy, and therefore, although qualitatively one with the Supreme Soul, he is under the illusion of identifying himself with matter. And to get out of this illusory conception of factual life, the individual soul has to depend on the Super Soul to be recognized as one with him. In that sense also, the Super Soul is the supreme shelter, and there is no doubt about it. The individual living entity, the jiva, is always dependent on the Super Soul, Paramatma, because the individual soul forgets his spiritual identity, whereas the Super Soul, Paramatma, does not forget. His transcendental... I'll read that again. The individual living entity, the jiva, is always dependent on the Super Soul, Paramatma, because the individual soul forgets his spiritual identity, whereas the Super Soul, Paramatma, does not forget his transcendental position. In the Bhagavad Gītā, these separate positions of the Jiva-atma and the Paramatma are specifically mentioned. In the 4th chapter, Arjuna, the Jiva soul, is represented as forgetful of his many, many previous births, but the Lord, the Super Soul, is not forgetful. The Lord even remembers when he taught the Bhagavad Gītā to the sun god some billions of years before. The Lord can remember such millions and billions of years, as stated in the Bhagavad Gītā 7:26, as follows. Vidaham samatitani vartamanani charjuna bhavishyani chaputani mam tu veda na kaśćana. The Lord, in his eternal blissful body of knowledge, is fully aware of all that happened in the past, that which is going on at the present, and also what will happen in the future. But in spite of his being the shelter of both the Paramatma and Brahman, persons with a poor fund of knowledge are unable to understand him as he is. The propaganda of the identity of cosmic consciousness with the consciousness of the individual living entities is completely misleading, because even such a person or individual soul as Arjuna could not remember his past deeds, although he is always with the Lord. And what can the tiny ordinary man, falsely claiming to be one with the cosmic consciousness, know about his past, present, and future? I offer my respectful obeisances to His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, and to all the assembled devotees. Vansha kalpataruscha kripa sindhubheva patitanam bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. It's much easier to surrender to Krishna than not. Hiranyakashipu had asked Brahma for multiple benedictions, and Brahma gave a side comment that don't ask for things that you can't enjoy peacefully. And the implication is that living beings can't enjoy anything peacefully when they usurp those things from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So in the matter of aligning oneself for surrender, Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gītā, Bhoktaram yatapasam sarvaloka maheshwaram suridam sarvabhutanam gyatva mam shantim richati. That when one has a clear awareness that the Lord is the enjoyer, and one then works with one's senses to give enjoyment to the Lord's senses, then, as Krishna says at the end of this sentence, shantim richati, one feels peaceful because one's properly aligned. Prahlad Maharaj gives a similar point, or gives the principle in his prayers to Lord Nrsimhadev. Naivatmana prabhararyam nijalava purno manam janam avidusa karano vrinite yad yashano bhagavati vidhunoti taśchatmane pratimukasya yatha mukashri. He says, just as when we look in the mirror and we decorate our face, we notice that the reflection in the mirror is also decorated. And he compares us to reflections of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. There's a way in which when we, for instance, decorate the Lord, then we naturally feel uplifted and we feel opulent by making the Lord opulent. Whereas when we try to make ourselves look opulent, we look foolish. Those who anoint themselves in various ways with the best of accoutrements, although perhaps if they're really well situated, they look okay for a while, but not for long. And they never feel comfortable. I know I never do. Like, what to wear? Does it look right? Is everything in order? Nothing's ever in order when I try to decorate myself, except for something devotional like tilak. Then I can feel slightly satisfied, because the intention is that I'm doing it to please the Lord. And of course, darshan, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur said, means not to see the Lord, but to be seen by the Lord. If that's my idea in decorating myself, to be seen favorably by the Lord, then one might feel satisfied. And Bhoktaram Jagatapasam means also that it's very hard to find somebody who can accept something from us gracefully. The Lord can take everything and we can give to Him. Sarvaloka Maheshwaram, this solves all problems, as does the similar point in the Sri Upanishad, which points out, Ishavasyam idam sarvam yat kincha jagatyam jagat tena tena bunchita magridha kasa sudanam, that everything animate or inanimate within the universe is controlled and owned by the Lord. One should therefore accept only those things necessary for himself, which are set aside as his quota, and one should not accept the other things, knowing well to whom they belong. And giving this accreditation to the Supreme Personality of Godhead as the Supreme Controller and the owner of everything certainly gives immediate alignment, solves all problems. In fact, once when I was in great anxiety due to some business dealings that I felt overwhelmed by, could have used Mathura Manohar at that point, but I didn't know where he was at that time. So I complained to one of my mentors that I was losing sleep over some impropriety on somebody else's part, I felt. And the first thing they said to me was, well, you're not the Supreme Controller. And I immediately felt better. I thought, that's how that works. In a similar way, this verse is pointing out about the Lord's the shelter of everyone. And so there's this admonition by Krishna, Bhoktaram, Yagatapasam, use your senses to please Krishna's senses. Sarvalok Maheshwaram, see everything as Krishna's. And in the path of bhakti, then, as Prabhupada puts it, the devotee sees everything in the universe as paraphernalia to be used in the service of the Lord. In which case, as Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gītā, Brahmanyataya karmani sangam tyakva kurotiya, lipitena sapapena padma patram ivambasa. You live like a lotus when you use everything as paraphernalia in the service of Krishna. You never see anything as belonging to yourself. And the lotus is called Padmaja, which means it's born in mud. And it alights upon the surface of the water. And not only is it not muddy, but it also is impervious to the water. So water just runs off. So similarly, when one accepts this principle that Krishna is the Supreme Controller and everything belongs to Him, then there's a way in which Krishna says here, lipyatena sapapena. The word lipyate means besmeared. You know what that word means? Whatever it is, it's not good. You don't want to be besmeared by papa. It means it rubs off on you, the material world. Unless you have the sense, Brahmanyadaya karamani sangam tyakva, you surrender everything to Krishna. Karotiya lipyatena sapapena padma patram ivambasa. So Krishna says, live like a lotus. And then finally he says that Suridam sarvabhutanam, that I'm the friend of every living being. So that's important to know that Krishna is our well-wisher. And on the other hand, when I forget these principles and work to organize or reorganize the material things that I have, then there's a sense of frustration because they never quite fit together. When they do, then they immediately start to fall apart. What to speak of the theme of this verse, which is that everything's interdependent. And of course, Krishna mentions in the Bhagavad Gītā that there are 5 factors to every action. And my endeavor is one part of that, but ultimately the super soul, and then circumstances, the time, the place, all of them together in concert allow me to perform some activity. Otherwise, I'm helpless. So it's a relief to know that I'm helpless. Shri Shri Hṛdy, isn't it? And the simple process of bhakti is to very humbly admit that Krishna is the Supreme Controller and that I am His eternal servant. As Bhaktivinoda Thakur says, Jiv Krishna Das e Bishwas Korleto Artu Konai. If you admit this, that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, I'm His eternal servant, then he says, Dukonai, you won't experience duk, which sheets back to a concept of an axle that doesn't fit properly inside the wheel, and therefore there's friction. And dukkha, ka also means space, it's an element, and du means bad. So whenever we're not surrendered to Krishna, then, as they say in California, we're in a bad space. But Bhaktivinoda Thakur says one can immediately remedy that by understanding this principle that we're eternal servants of Krishna, we're interdependent with all his energies, and as the last sign on the Gita walk, which hopefully I can learn in Italian by the time we leave, says that, he quotes the Bhagavad Gītā and says, Matah paratanam nanya kinchid asti dhananjaya mai sarvam idam protam sutre manigana iva. Everything's held together by Krishna, and he's the one orchestrating everything. And the Creator can see everything, but everyone else who's in the mix can't see it. This is another point Krishna makes in the Bhagavad Gītā, a similar point. Narupamasye hatatopalepyate nanto nacharya nacha sampratishta ashvatamenam suvruramulam asangashastrena dridhena chitva tatakparam tat parimargitavyam yasmin gatano nirvatanti bhuya tameva chadyam purusham prapadye yatak praviti prashita purani. And that is, the material world is seemingly convoluted in that it's similar to, analogous to, a huge banyan tree. Which in and of itself, as a tree, an entity, is quite confusing because it looks like the branches are downward and the roots are upward, Krishna says in the beginning of that chapter. And that's narupamasye hatatopala. We can't see the form of the tree. Nanto nachadya. We can't see the beginning or the end. Ashvatamenam suvarudamulam asangashastrena dridhena krichitva. So he says that you should not try to navigate the tree, but you should just cut it down. That's helpful too, isn't it? So yes. Only one person said yes. Yeah, so he says, asanga shastrena dridhena chitva. Don't try to fix the tree, don't try to find a comfortable place in it, but just cut it down by asanga. And the asanga, as it mentioned also in a Vedic text, asango hyayam purushaha. It says, little jiva, you have no place here in the material world. You have no connection with it, actually. It's only perceived. It's an illusory state for the soul, as summed up by Haviyogendra in his discussion with Maharaj Nimi, where he says, Bhayam dvitiya abhiniveshatasya ishad apetasya viparya yosmiti tanmaya to buddha abhajetam bhaktyayika yesham gurudevatātma. And that is that when we become abhiniveshata, or absorbed in the conception of something separate from Krishna, we don't see that he's the supreme controller, he's the supreme enjoyer, and that he's our friend. And we independently engage with the material world or try to accommodate living in the tree of the material world. Then bhayam syat means fear arises. It's a scary situation for the soul. Ishad apetasya, which means it's caused by turning away from the Supreme Personality of Godhead and forgetting this principle, the Ishavasya principle. Ishad apetasya viparya means opposite of what our real nature is. Viparyo smriti, and our intelligence becomes perverted. Tanmaya to Buddha, and that's because of the potency of Maya, which can bewilder the conditioned soul. Then he says, tanmaya buddha abhijatam bhaktyayakayesham gurudevatāma. The solution, and I'm basically saying the same thing over and over again, but I don't mind it. I hope you don't. And that is that bhaktyayakayesham gurudevatāma, one should simply give one pointed attention towards Krishna. And when one does that, then one's freed from that situation. So this verse, there's many points to be made. And perhaps if you'd like to recall any of them that you want me to expound upon, or you want to expound upon them, please help yourself. But the simple understanding of the fact that Krishna knows everything and I don't, that he's the supreme controller of everything, he owns everything and I don't, that he's the enjoyer and that I enjoy by serving his senses and bringing all kinds of enjoyment to him, and that he's our friend. These principles can be mentioned in regard to this verse. It's a very philosophical section of the Bhagavatam. You don't find such information elsewhere, generally. A description of our relationship with the material world and also with Krishna, simultaneously presented, otherwise known as Sambandha Jnana. So now, you asked a question to expand the conversation or give a reflection on anything I've said so far that you found to be exportable. I'll count down from 3 and then I'll start calling on people. Brahma?
The verse refers to yesterday's verse, the 3 stages, which, when I look it up, adhyatmic, adhidaivic, adhibhautic. I don't quite understand. Now, one second, I find the count this one here. The above mentioned stages of different living entities are interdependent. Exactly, what does that mean? These 3. Adhidaivic is the stage of what is the life form of demigod, I guess.
Yeah, the example Prabhupada gives here, first of all, dependence. But we could just say there's 3 stages of this idea in any case. First is dependence, then comes independence, and then there's interdependence. 3 ways to describe one's relationship with any community or person or so our relationship with the demigods is, in a sense, symbiotic. For instance, when we do a yajna, the demigods receive some benefit from that, as is well known from those who read the Bhagavatam, that demigods benefit from the swaha activity, giving them some sustenance. Meanwhile, we can't live without them either, because, as Prabhupada gives the example here, the sun, Surya, then empowers the eye to see. Or you could say that they're interdependent, because without the eye you can't see the sun, and without the sun there's no meaning to the eye. Because the eye is meant to catch light and then translate it into imagery in the brain. So the two are dependent. One is dependent on the other. Each are dependent on the other.
The sun is not dependent on our eyes, is it?
No meaning without human beings and the devas, in which they are interdependent. And the point here is that in all these relationships, we may be unaware of the interdependence, or we are becoming aware of it now by reading this and remembering how dependent we are. But Krishna is above all of them and can see the interdependence of all of it because he was the creator of it. In any, for instance, structure, somebody who was the engineer who put it together in the first place, conceived of it, knows where the supporting walls are and how everything how the ingredients came together and so forth, has a comprehensive understanding of how the house holds up in the first place, whereas others may just see the various features of the house. Mm-hmm. So Bhagavatam's giving us that vision from high above the material world to see how we're interdependent, which leads to, most importantly, leads to a mood of acceptance of Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead and the controller, and that I'm his servant.
So it means that it says here, in the absence of one of these three, another is not understood. What is not understood means we need all three to understand the totality of life in the material world.
Well, there's a way in which they all work together to create an environment.
Yeah.
And you take one out, and then
the others don't make sense.
Yeah, they're interdependent. They connect with one another and they support one another. As in combination, they make sense. You take one out from the other, and then you lose the effect. So it's kind of a whole universe is orchestrated in a very minute way. Krishna has arranged everything so it all works together.
Can I ask one more?
Yeah, please.
I mean, you just mentioned that the demigods, they're described as being dependent on our offerings. Why are they dependent on us? Such high living entity, highly elevated living entities. Why are they dependent on the things we put in the fire or the offerings?
Well, kind of in an abstract way. Give an example. It's not abstract, it's a specific example, but in a prison, there are prison guards, and then there are the prisoners. And the prison guards have their livelihood watching the prisoners. They're making sure they don't get out. And they might bring their food by and hand it to them, but if there were no prisoners to take care of, there wouldn't be a prison and they wouldn't be employed. So there's this symbiotic relationship in that way, that they're employed to oversee the workings of our senses, to help us enact our karmas and so forth. That's why people do astrology, try to figure out which demigod is going to harass us next, or whatever kind of stretch we're going to have, based on who's in the cell block that day. Thanks, Brahma, for asking questions. Yes.
You mentioned that we should not believe that we are not the supreme controller. And I mean, it's easy to say that, yeah, I'm not the supreme controller, but what I think the need during the day is that we are not acting with this kind of consciousness. So my question is, how can we grow this kind of consciousness during the day, that I'm not the supreme controller? Because ultimately we expect something.
And a practical application of this, for me, is going on book distribution. I never know what's going to happen. And oftentimes when I go somewhere to go on book distribution, other people want to come with me and watch the magic. And I'm thinking, yeah, Krishna, where's the magic? Because I'm fully dependent. So as an example, whenever I knock on a door, going door to door, I always wait for the door, for the person inside, and I'm saying to myself, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. And when I'm in a city street and I'm trying to make sense of the whole thing or be absorbed in a service mood for distributing there, even in the cacophony of sounds and the obvious mixture of modes of ignorance and passion, then the way in which I don't get carried away by it, and I stay in that mood of, Krishna, if you so desire, I'll serve you here, and if you want to send somebody, I'll do my best, whatever I can, to accommodate that person. And the way I'm able to stay in that consciousness is by saying Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. And I noticed that as soon as I stop doing that, then the mind starts to try to figure everything out. And it's very difficult. There's a lot of distraction, and also we're not able to figure out the material world, ever. It's a constant conundrum. That's why narupamaseha tatopalabhyate. Krishna is saying in that verse in the 15th chapter of the Gita, don't try figuring it out, just cut it down. Asanga shastrena, dridhena chid. Shastrena means use a sword to cut it down, and the real sword is the divya gyan. It's divine knowledge that emanates from chanting Hare Krishna. Because Vasudeve bhagavati bhakti yoga prayojita janayashuvayara yam chayara haitukam. When you're directly engaged in transcendental sound vibrations, serving Krishna with your tongue and listening and just in that mood of surrender, then you're able to, as Prabhupada gives the example, sorry, I interrupted my sentence, but it's purposeful. There's a way in which an elephant, if it tries to swim across a strong current in a river, it'll get washed away. But he said, in the small fish, it's playing in the current, and it's even big waves. It can play in the waves because it's built for it. We're built for prayer. That's what the human body is specially designed for this. And if I try to do otherwise, then I become washed away. But Chaitanya Mahaprabhu just gives this very simple solution, is be very humble and continue chanting. There was Tapana Mishra who read one too many books, and he got confused about the purpose of life, and he was hankering for some shelter. He had a dream that beautiful avatar would come to him, and the next day he met Chaitanya Mahaprabhu when Mahaprabhu was traveling in East Bengal. And he told Mahaprabhu, I'm very confused. I don't know how to negotiate this world. And Mahaprabhu said, well, then just say Hare Krishna. And Subhuti Roy also, very very relatable story. Subhuti Roy was the boss, and then he wasn't the boss, and the person that he was the boss of then became his boss. And then that person became, as induced by his significant other, the controller of Subhuti Roy, but not just the controller. His wife wanted him to punish Subhuti Roy by killing him for getting a little harsh with the person when the roles were reversed in previous times. And then he tried to get advice from a lot of people about what to do about this. And everyone told him something different. Some of them were drink hot molten lead or ghee and die. Thanks for the advice. And others told him no big deal. And his wife, he had been converted into another religion by, at that time, all he had to do was sprinkle water from the pot. So he was in a tough spot, And then he met Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and asked him what to do, and he said, chant Hare Krishna. So if all else fails, and it will, chant Hare Krishna. And can trace back how we feel throughout the day and how we're able to have vision by how much we put into our chanting. Prabhupada gave us that directive to make a vow to chant at least 16 rounds a day. And if the more and more we take advantage of that and be very present for the chanting and really take shelter of the holy name, then we'll find that it's natural that we'll be able to swim in the current rather than being overwhelmed by it. As Jayananda had written a letter to Prabhupada about something, I wasn't privy to Jayananda's letter, but the answer is there, and Prabhupada says, it's the same old answer, chant Hare Krishna. Could somebody ask another question? Oh, Naresh Prabhu.
Not really a question, just a reflection.
Okay. Is there allowed?
So I was reflecting on Brahma Prabhu's
Maharaj is pretty good too.
question. Yeah, he's a Maharaj. No question about that. I was reflecting on that, and I kind of, at least for me, it's like if we observe the Bhagavatam, what the Bhagavatam is saying, what Prabhupada is saying, if we kind of try to observe it intellectually, but just observe it, anyway, for me, it becomes easier. The point I want to make, it's easier if we take it personally and put ourselves into the picture, and then it seems to become more understandable and more relevant. That was the...
Thank you for that reflection. That's very helpful. And I'll just say in response, before Maharaj makes his point, if that's okay, Maharaj, that the Bhagavatam knows us well. The Bhagavatam is Krishna. Krishna sva-kathāḥ dharma-ganadi-visaha kalu Naṣṭa-prāyeṣv purāṇa-kodhanodita. It is the incarnation that's arisen just after Krishna's left. So no different from Krishna, just as we hear in the purport today, Vedaham samatitani vartamanani charjuna, etc., that Krishna knows everything about us. And he also knows how to extricate us from the material world. And he does so through Bhagavatam. In fact, that was Prabhupada's main point in his writings on Jaladuta on his way to America, that this is tato jayam udire. This is the means of conquest of the world, is the Srimad Bhagavatam. So in that, and relevant to your point, the Bhagavatam knows us so well, it categorically covers all of the psychological anomalies that hold us back from this surrender. And Krishna describes the three main categories of anomaly that we have. Vita, Raga, Bhaya, Krodha. Raga, which is attachment to matter, which is just insane. Bhaya, which is fear of our personhood, which is equally as insane. And Krodha, which means frustration, anger due to frustration of not being able to discern the truth and hearing many different versions of how to extricate oneself from the material world. So when we hear Bhagavatam, there's an uncanny, we may have an uncanny sense that Bhagavatam knows me and has given me these various scenarios so that I'm able to give up these psychological anomalies, Vita, Raga, Bhaya, Krodha. As an example, I never fail to be impressed by the story of Puranjana and how he's searching the world to find a suitable place to enjoy his life. And then he ends up in a park. And then he meets a beautiful young woman, and then he thinks, this could work. It always seems like a good idea at the time. And then, he says to her, like, who are you anyway? She says, I have no idea. I don't know who I am. I don't know where I came from. All I know is I'm here right now. And the young woman, he asked her, who are you? And she said, I don't know, but I'm here. And he said, yeah, we're both here, so how about it? And one thing leads to another. And that scenario of the park that's repeated in every poem of the world, every song of the world, every drama that was ever made, every movie that was ever made. It's the same thing over and over again because there's the Adi Ras in the spiritual world. But this story takes us on a journey and says, since human beings can understand causality, cats cannot, but then it takes us through. So every time we see the park, we see the handsome prince or the beautiful young woman, then we think, yeah, I know how this turns out. And then they say, yeah, no thanks. Meanwhile, we have Jayatam Surato Pangor Mama Manda Matiragati Sarvaswapa Dambojao Radha Madana Mohana. Krishna is the attractor. And through the practice of bhakti, our senses really do get purified to the point where we're attracted to the beauty of and the aesthetic of the spiritual world, not the least of which is Krishna's forms, his archa, all the scents, the smells, the beautiful, the raga, and so forth. Maharaj, please. Sorry to keep you waiting.
Well, since everyone is reflecting upon Brahma-Muhurta Prabhu's question, yes, I've been thinking how those three are interrelated. First of all, in terms of the devatas that control particular senses, there's no meaning to being a controller. This is something to control. No meaning to being a king, blessed in the kingdom. And then the subtle body normally is the template for the gross body. So the two are interrelated, and the devatas are implicated in controlling the whole realm of activity between the subtle body and the gross body. So in this way, the whole package is correlated. Of course, abnormally, it can exist. There are living entities that can exist with just a subtle body. But generally, there's a gross body based on the subtle body. So, if you look at all those three, you see that they are indeed dependent on one another. And in this way, the Bhagavatam is concluding to the point that beyond these dependencies, beyond these interrelationships, is the ultimate source of all of them. So it's building a philosophical case for presenting Bhagavan.
Can I make a short follow-up?
Yes, please.
The next sentence. But the Supreme Being, who sees every one of them as the shelter of the shelter, is independent of all. Yes, Krishna is independent. But what does this mean? He sees every one of these three, Adi, Adi, as the shelter of the shelter. And I have to say this is one of the verses that really puzzles me. And that probably I should just follow this, what you said, just chant Hare Krishna. And it will work out eventually, I will understand. But I'm struggling with this.
Well, since you were looking at Maharaj when you asked that question, if you'd like to respond.
There's so many shelters in material existence, but then there's so many shelters in material existence. What is the shelter of the shelter? Can you read the sentence again?
But the Supreme Being, who sees every one of them, the three stages of different living entities, who sees every one of them as the shelter of the shelter, is independent of all, and therefore he is the supreme.
So even material things can offer some shelter. So even those three things, they can, relatively speaking, they can offer some shelter.
So the abhadrāṇi can offer shelter.
Yes, the body can offer shelter. You can take shelter of your subtle body with its desires and its sense perceptions.
Yeah. Or you can take shelter of the living entity.
Yes, you can take shelter of a devata.
Yeah. Okay. So he sees every one of them as the shelter of the shelter.
Everyone's taking shelter somewhere because
Of somebody, of someone.
right. We can't live without shelter. That's our nature.
Right.
And the combinations and permutations of shelters here in the material world are continuous, and therefore we describe them as interdependent. But Krishna's Turiya. He is the fourth dimension. He's beyond all of them. Can observe all these interdependent relationships, but he's not a part of those. He's the controller of all of them. That's the meaning.
But Krishna is independent of all these three, so therefore he does not need to take shelter because he is the shelter. Is that the idea?
That's absolutely, yeah. And even in the purport, we have this hierarchy of an understanding of the hierarchy of Brahman, Paramatma, Bhagavan, etc. And, like in Gita, Krishna makes it clear, Brahmano hi tishtaham amritasya vyasya śṛṇvatāṁ chandharmasya sukasya ikandikasya cha. Here he says, Brahman is under my shelter. And what to speak of Paramatma? And, we get in the Chaitanya Charitamrita descriptions of how Krishna expands himself into the various Purushas and so forth. And then he says, they're just, as Maharaj mentioned yesterday, or as in the purport also, they're just a spark coming from Krishna. And this is something that Prabhupada mentions in the second canto, second chapter, 35th verse, in the verse that ends Anamapakai, when he's describing how anyone can observe him or herself. If you're introspective, he says, you can notice that you're not your body. Then you can notice that there is an intelligence coming from what he calls the super spirit. Just as the way a father, he says, gives good direction to the son, you can notice that you're getting that also from super spirit, he calls. And then you can deduce that because the super spirit is there just to assist the living entity, that there must be a higher conception of God, or a higher manifestation of God, or not a manifestation per se, but there must be a higher form of God, because God's business isn't just to cater to the jivas. And therefore you can, he says, come to the understanding of Bhagavan. And when we have that clear idea, then we have the perfect object of meditation. He who is beyond all of the other shelters, he's the supreme shelter, and he's the ultimate object that we can meditate upon. And we can do it by chanting Hare Krishna. One last point or question.
It is getting clearer. When you said hierarchy, that makes a lot of sense. Shukadev establishes the hierarchy with Krishna being clearly independent of everything and therefore the supreme shelter. Okay.
It's so helpful, right? Because the mind needs some place to take shelter. We need to have that clarity. Otherwise, yene vrivanaksha vimuktamaninas tvayastabhavad avashuddha-buddhaya aruya Kṛṣṇa paramparam tata patantyato nadrita ishmanangraya. In the purport to that verse, which is a prayer by demigods to Lord Krishna in the womb, in which they say, unless one comes to this clarity, not just clarity, but one's revival of relationship with the lotus-eyed Supreme Personality of Godhead, then all other forms of what is called there liberation, or you could also call shelter. As Prabhupada defines it in his purport, he says people try to find a liberation through having political advantage or having money. There's all these ideas of where I'm going to get shelter from in this world. But then they say aruya kṛṣṇa, which means you're just working hard for nothing, because it's not the shelter that's going to save you. You're going to fall back. Patantyada, you'll fall back down again from that, because it's not the supreme shelter. So Bhagavatam's unequivocal and gives us clarity that you have to find the Supreme Personality of God. That's the end of the verse I quoted from the Bhagavad Gītā of Narupamaseha. It said, Tata param tat parimargitavyam yasmin gata nani vatanti bhuya tameva chadyam purusham prapadye yatak praviti prashita purani. That after you cut down the tree, you can't just leave it. You got to go somewhere. And where is it? Parimargitavyam. You make the complete journey, and where are you going? Tat. You got to go to Him, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Om Tat Vishnu Paramam Param Sada. Still 2 minutes. Yes.
You mentioned in the class at the start how it's easier to surrender to Krishna than not.
It's easier to surrender to Krishna than not.
Yes, that is correct.
I stand by that. From extensive experience. Go ahead. Hold the mic close too.
It feels easier sometimes to not surrender in terms of...
That's ignorance. You know, when we get absorbed in ignorance, for instance, scrolling, it may seem to be a kind of a shelter, but it's shelter in the mode of ignorance. And Krishna then enlightens us in the Bhagavad Gītā. It says, shelter in the mode of ignorance leads to misery. Shelter in the mode of passion. Well, shelter in the mode of ignorance leads to more foolishness. So the shelter in the mode of passion leads to misery. And shelter in the mode of goodness, a sense of happiness. But the only shelter is shelter of Krishna. And he gives example even in the mode of goodness. It's like poison in the beginning, nectar in the end. And shelter in the mode of passion is nectar in the beginning, poison in the end. Relatable, right? And so there is some tapasya in taking shelter of Krishna because of the ways in which the senses have become addicted to passion and ignorance and so forth. And the remedy, śṛṇvatāṁ sva-kathāḥ Kṛṣṇa puṇya-śravaṇa-kīrtanaḥ hṛdy stho abhadrāṇi vidhunoti satām. Naṣṭa-prāyeṣv abhadreṣu nityaṁ bhagavata-sevayā bhagavaty uttama-śloke bhaktir bhavati naiṣṭhikī.tadā rajas-tamo-bhāvāḥ kāma-lobhādayaś ceta iter anabhidam sthītam sattve prasidati. By hearing Bhagavatam, then gradually all that clears up, and we can understand that my only shelter is Krishna. And then that verse, Tadā rajas. I know when I was a kid, when we do a magic show, and we pull a rabbit out of a hat or something, we go, ta-da! So in this verse, there's a point at which, ta-da means at that point, ta-da! I'm free from all these false shelters. Tadā rajas-tamo-bhāvāḥ, they're all diminishing because of the power of Krishna in the Srimad Bhagavatam. So chanting Hare Krishna, hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, it's the panacea through which we can give up all bad shelters. Durashraya, bad shelter. That's the material world. So many admonitions in the Bhagavatam about don't do that. Try to come to the light. Nayam deho deha bhaja niloke kashtam kama marhate vidbhuja me tapodivyam putrakeina satvam shudyat yasmad brahma saukyam tvanantam. Rishabhadeva said, you're going to do austerity anyway. The material world is austerity. So you can do this the easy way or the hard way. If you use all of the necessary tapasya for advancing just tapasya in Krishna's service, tapodivyam, then you'll attain the ultimate goal of life. Dushrila Prabhupada, Dushi Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Shishi Panchatattva, Shishi Gornitai, if you so desire, please empower us to see the real shelter is at your lotus feet. And please let us distribute it to as many people as possible in the whole material world so that everyone can dance in ecstasy and go back home, back to Godhead. Everyone agrees with this prayer, in whole or in part. Please unmute and say Hare Krishna. Vancha kalpataruscha kripa sindhabeva patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha nantakoti vaishnavi ki jai go premanande.